Please take your seats. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here for the session on commons and radical urban politics. This is a joint session between European Commons Assembly and Transeuropa, so it's nice to see everyone mixing here in Medialab. I hope you Transeuropa people had good workshops today. We were working on different themes of the commons here in Medialab. And yeah, today we're gonna have an open conversation looking at how the commons has been promoted in municipalities and also how we can work together with municipalities to promote commoning and commoners on the ground. So Felipe from Zemos 98 is moderating the discussion. Thank you. And I will leave it to him to introduce our speakers and the format.
Hi. So thank you for coming. It has been a long day and you have been working intensively, so I guess you are tired. We are also tired, but it's really nice to see such a group, international group, working that hard. Sorry also for the delay, but as you know, the commons, the social movements, we are not perfect. So we are sometimes late because we need to fix something which was not properly designed. And for that we have collective intelligence, so thanks to that, we just fixed what we had before and now we have the fishbowl format. So let me quickly explain what's about. So we are going to be discussing for 1 hour and a half / 2 hours on different topics related to the commons, urban politics, the municipal candidacies, so new politics, all the things. And we have 2 empty chairs in case someone from the audience wants to participate. We are going to start with this group, but the idea is to open the word to everyone who wants to say something, right? So if you say you want to share any idea, any thought, please take the chair and we will give you the mic in the next word.
Can you say that there's translation available?
Yes. There is simultaneous translation for those who don't speak English, and that's why we need to speak slowly. Also, if you take the microphone, put it like this, so not so close, because if not, they can't hear properly. I also forgot to say that we are part of Zemos 98, as Nicole said, and we are co-organizing the Transeuropa Festival, and this is a joint activity between the European Commons Assembly and the Transeuropa Festival. So now I would like to pass the mic to Kate, Eva, Pablo, and Xenia to present themselves, and after that I will launch the first question topic, right? Pablo?
To introduce myself?
Yeah.
Okay. So, can you hear me? Yes? No? Can you hear me? I don't think that microphone is working at all. Now? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Pablo. It's always difficult to define myself, but I've been a hacktivist for some years. Then the 15M movement crossed my life. Then I got into municipalism, and now I'm the consular of the Citizen Participation and Transparency government area in the city of Madrid. And they call, well, in Spain, consular, we say concejal, but they call me the concejac. So, but I guess that the most important thing from me now is that I have a 9-month-old baby. And so they say that when you have a baby, you look at your daily worries and challenges at a much pragmatic way. But for me, it was right the opposite, because I'm so much more into what I'm doing now, because I think that when Sarah is going to be 20 years old. If I make a little tiny mistake today, the world is going to be a horror. And if I do things like perfect, everything is going to be good, there's going to be democracy, and she's going to have a nice city to live in. So that's it.
Oh, hello. I'm Ksenia. I come from Belgrade. I'm part of the collective called Ministry of Space, which was like for years is dealing with questions of use of public spaces, public property, culture, independent activities and stuff like that. The collective actually organized lots of initiatives of squatting old factories, squatting cinemas, raising attention to privatization of both like buildings, factories, and cultural spaces, like the big event of the privatization of the whole chain of cinemas in Belgrade. Since 2014, we actually started occupying with Belgrade Waterfront project and protesting against it and doing lots of different activities about it. And so today I'm also part of this wider initiative called Don't Let Belgrade Drown. And now it's actually consuming, because Felipe told us to say something personal. And I'm like, you know, when you go out and the only thing you can talk about is like Belgrade Waterfront. So maybe later on during the party we can discuss other stuff. Like, but for now it's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, hi, my name is Eva. I come from Zagreb. I'm part of the Zagreb's Right to the City organization. And also I'm an activist of the leftist municipal platform, Zagreb is Ours, that got formed in 2017 and won some seats in city parliament this spring. Right to the City works as a platform that actually fights privatization of and appropriation of public resources and public and common resources in the city. It fights against commercialization and gathers around itself a large number of different actors, networks, trade unions, and others, in order to achieve goals that it set out. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it.
Hello, I'm Kate. I'm originally from London, and in September 2008 I moved to Spain, which was a great moment to move to Spain with the economic crisis, just the exact same moment. And in 2014 I somehow got sucked into this municipal revolution process in Barcelona, into the campaign for the city elections, and I participate in Barcelona Comunes, which is the platform that is currently governing in a minority Barcelona. And mostly I'm working on the international network of municipal movements, which is how I met these two wonderful people. And my main personal worry at the moment is whether I will be able to get my AVE back to Barcelona tomorrow, or whether they will have shut the border, which I hope will not happen.
Well, since I asked you to share a personal thing, I will do it myself. I like Star Wars, so I still think I can be a Jedi for the commons or for politics, but I can't move things. I have been trying, but I'm a terrible tennis player, but I also keep trying, and I love soups. So everything which you can eat with a spoon is something which I really love. So later on, if you can share recipes, I'm really happy to do that. Just before I launch the the question. My role here is just to facilitate the discussion. So since we are all involved in collective processes or social movements, we know how to self-manage that. But yes, just to point out before we start. Also regarding to the definition or the title of the session, it's Commons and Radical Urban Politics. It's like a huge, right? Like we are going to discuss deep political issues. But instead of discussing the theoretical side, even if some of my questions will be theoretical, I would like also to hear like concrete stories, experiences, because that's, I think, the main reason to be here, to know other people, to find peers, and to reinforce the translocal networks. So the first issue or question is, when we think about the commons or many of the movements we have been watching in the recent years, there is this desire of transforming the public institutions in a more participatory way. So to foster inclusivity, because the traditional parties or the ruling ones were not doing that because of the privatization of the public bodies or because they were taking care of their own interests. So when it comes to participation and participatory processes, we sometimes forget that it takes time. So as Pablo said before, he is here because someone else is taking care of his baby. And when it comes to, for example, migrants who have 2 jobs, sometimes they cannot participate. So the first question is, how can we deal with that lack of diversity when it comes to these movements like the commons, urban politics, from the perspective of an institution, but not only. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that. Silence is also fine, okay? And remember that we have 2 chairs, so if someone has this energy to say something, please go there and I will pass you the mic.
Well, maybe I can break the ice telling an anecdotic fact that maybe inspires a little bit. We in the city of Madrid, we are also a minority government, and we're this kind of weird government where anarchists and communists and activists and independent people and kind of a weird, really weird government that happened to make this kind of legal hack so that people could put in place direct democracy mechanisms that itself, as a practice, is in my opinion, is a very good example of what can be a common. Because we created this free software participatory tool, which is Decide Madrid, that is now being used in like 50 cities. And we thought that that was a good opportunity to create a bottom-up mechanism so that people could make proposals. If 1% of the people in Madrid supports your proposal, we are going to make a vote. But not the politicians, but the people in Madrid. We put ballot boxes in the streets, people vote for the citizen proposal, and if they agree with that proposal, the government has to obey, right? And this actually not like a cutting-edge technology tool. It's a very simple tool, but this tool is propagating through all over the world. There are more than 50 cities that have taken the source code, and some of the cities don't really have these commoners' ideals. For example, Buenos Aires, which is the government is the party of Macri, which is pretty much like the opposite ideals. But they put these commons in place, and the people is taking it now. And this is the anecdotic fact. We have a huge gender gap with these tools. The digital gap plus the gender gap is crazy. It is very big. It still is tremendous. It's massive amounts of people using it. In Madrid, it has like 355,000 people from Madrid are registered in Decide Madrid, which makes it about the second biggest website in Madrid after Facebook. In terms of registered users, that is crazy. But when we put up voting, unless we set up different channels for participation, there's a huge difference between males and females using it in males' favor. So we found, and this is the interesting fact, I hope it makes some kind of inspiration in you. We had the idea, well, when there's a voting going on, why don't we send up a letter, an envelope to the house of every single Madrilenian saying, we are going to vote this thing, here's your ballot, here's an envelope and a smaller envelope and another envelope for free postal voting, and that was really the solution. It was very expensive, but 60% versus 40% women used that channel, and we said, well, that was easy. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about, but maybe when we have problems with not being able to feminize the politics, is because we create channels that are not probably accessible for everyone. It's just that simple. Does that make any sense?
Yes. But
Hi.
Hi. Sorry. Yeah, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So you will go after.
Okay. So I would like to make two reflections based on the Barcelona en Común experience, particularly the organization experience rather than the City Hall experience. One being something we do particularly well, and one being something we do particularly badly, if I can say that. But first I'd like to say that if we're talking about diversity, gender, I'd like to, let's say, praise this format. I hate speaking in public. For me, speaking in front of this many people with a microphone is terrifying. But it's slightly easier when we're in a circle, we're doing short contributions. For me, the idea of standing and doing a 45-minute monologue is terrifying. I think a lot of men would love to have that opportunity. So, for the format of the way we do things is super important, so I really appreciate that this is the fishbowl format. I think something we do quite well in Barcelona en Común is the gender diversity side. We have parity, gender parity as a minimum requirement in all formal spaces. I know in some countries in the UK, that's somehow still a controversial idea. No, it has to be a red line basic thing. And I would even go further than that and say that women being in leadership roles is really important. Barcelona en Común was really driven by a lot of really strong women, and I think if you're setting up any kind of project, you have to have in the very core driving group not just gender balance, but preferably female majority. Another thing we do, talking about long speeches, is to try and stop particularly older white men making very long speeches. which, I mean, like I said, we have gender parity in all of our spaces, but we started to measure the amount of time that people were speaking, and we actually realized that despite the fact there were 50% or more women in the room, about 65% of the time was being taken up by men. So measuring is good, so at least you know what the situation is. And then actually we discovered it wasn't that women weren't asking to speak, it was that when they spoke, they were very brief, and these men would make very, very long speeches. So we introduced a 2-minute time limit, which I'm probably going over now, which is super useful, cut people off. And what else? Well, those are just a couple of ideas. The thing we do less well is, and I think that's reflected here, is ethnic diversity. And I think there's a slight reticence in social movements and political movements, certainly in Barcelona, to recognize white privilege. And I think we could learn a lot from the US, where I think the debate is far more advanced. I think in Barcelona, when criticisms or accusations of lack of ethnic diversity are made, people say, I'm not racist. And they have this idea of racism being kind of active antipathy to diversity, and actually there's not really a broad understanding of things that we might be doing that could be unintentionally excluding people. And yeah, just I think we have a lot to learn on that one.
David, did you hear 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, I'm a white man who talks too much. Yeah. Both the Barcelona and the Madrid governments have done a lot of courageous things. As far as participation goes, I think we have to have a new way. I mean, I saw how they had a referendum on the Plaza de España here in Madrid. There have been other referendums, and I know in Valencia there have been many on the same system, and the participation actually is sometimes around 1%. Plaza de España is 1.7%. That's what I read in the press. Maybe it was more. I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. But I think that often the options that are put forward are not stark enough. They're not confronting enough the options. It's about having 40 centimeters more of sidewalk or not, things like that. And I think the options have to be more stark. And then the last issue I wanted to talk about is we're breathing very bad air. I know there have been some measures by the local council, but there are no real structural objectives to bring down the air pollution. And we saw that the measures taken yesterday only reduced the traffic by 1% in the city. Barcelona has the Superilla project, but globally, the amount of cars in the big cities in Spain with the economic recovery is actually going up. So the commons is the air. And I think, as an ecologist, I feel rather disappointed by the lack, beyond anecdotal kind of segmented policies on the ecological objectives of climate change, of air and biodiversity. I think it's been rather low on the political objectives.
Yeah, just to slightly break, maybe he's, like we are in Madrid and he's occupying with participation in Madrid, so if all the people from Madrid come here and then ask him tell him to do this and that, it's kind of, so I will put it on another level, Belgrade level, where we actually would appreciate even this so much, like this is what we are praying for at this moment, because the diversity that you're talking about, this is how I feel in Belgrade, that actually citizens are the group that we are lacking compared to institutions. So they are so close that actually they get shocked when they see people, and which we use a lot actually to at least open what you said also about posting stuff. We would, I'm an architect, so I deal with urban planning issues. So actually procedure is so close that you have some ways in participating, but it seems like for the institutions the goal is to don't ever let you know that something is happening, even if you're in your own street. So the fact that you first are informed that maybe they are building something next to your house is like, wow, now you know. But then, like, to be able to read what is actually going to happen is the next level, because you usually get all the plans in AutoCAD format, which, like, people cannot read and also cannot understand what is happening. So, like, the second level would be to actually organize some kind of format where you could actually translate it into a normal language, and this is second. And the third would be to make people take the step and actually participate, write their complaint, go there to this public hearing and discuss things. So, like, just to be able to participate is a huge thing. But the next thing is, like, because in Belgrade now, people are so frustrated when they realize something is happening, so they have this approach, okay, you are not going to build anything here. And then you have institutions that are, yeah, we have the power, we will build. So you create two opposite poles, and even you have to open the space and give enough informations to actually open the participation process, not just to give it to the citizens because they cannot, I mean, you can come as an ecologist and discuss pollution, blah, 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 but like, who are you discussing and on what topic? It's also about the referendum, like, do we only vote for yes or no, or is it, what amount of information do we need to actually be able to use these participation tools to actually make a meaningful decision? So it's not just about tools, it's not just about even have the opportunity to participate, it's just about really giving enough information for us all to benefit from the process.
I'm going to briefly just share also on that account what we are dealing with right now. As I said, I come from an activist background, and then now we have this double role in the city. On one side, we are activists, and on the other, we are either councillors or activists and organizers in the political platform. So for me, it's interesting how in these two modes of working, you attract different kind of people and different kind of situations. And what so far we are learning, I mean, there is still a lot of confusion to our own role. But what I think we are learning right now is that while we were doing this activism around the city, there were topics that were either very important topics in the city or national very important topics, and usually it attracted a lot of people on protests. It affected people in cases of fighting against, privatization of a factory or something like that. But and then we moved from one issue to another issue and collected different kind of people, and then after a while it's just you move and you create certain networks, but you're never at one actual place. And this being in neighborhood councils and being in boroughs councils, and also then having somebody in the city parliament kind of makes us stay in one place and makes us deal with the issues that David just said, like do we put the street here or pavement there, which I find quite a challenging lesson now, because in that sense you are there and you have to create certain kind of community around this, around these issues, and maybe hope for creating a political action in that sense. So that's how, I guess, in terms of different kind of people of different kind of backgrounds that we are dealing with, from migrants to other social strata or classes and whatever. And I find it quite interesting, and we are still very much not able to recognize whether we are activists or we are politicians or whatever you might call it. And we still use these kind of activist impulses and activist methods in dealing with these things. But yeah, it attracts different kind of people, and we are now, I guess, more entrenched in the places of the city we weren't able to get in before. So yeah.
I'm thinking. So I think around the commons or certain social movements, there is this desire to change the institution, to make it more inclusive, and I think the good side of, for example, having platforms like this in Madrid is that we have statistics, so we can count on that. But on the other hand, and coming back to the lack of diversity, and it's also that sometimes people have precarious lives. So we have precariousness as part of, so participation takes time, and at the same time we have an ecosystem of mainstream media attacking every day these new governments, and not only, also portraying the social movements as the problem and not the solution. So yesterday we were speaking with the organization, and they were saying, okay, it's great that we have La Ingobernable, and I think this is a very interesting thing, because this festival is possible partly because of the City Council of Madrid, but at the same time, part of the City Council is against of the idea of occupying a building. And when we think in La Ingobernable, the organization was very happy, saying, well, we didn't have a lot of bureaucracy. So we didn't have to deal with all the things you portray when you think in a public institution like security, like a border, right? So in a moment right now, in a political moment in which borders are that terrific, so public institutions sometimes feel like a very, a place where you cannot feel safe. Like you are like threatening the building. So how do you see this? So how do you see this desire from the activist? Oh, sorry, I thought someone was doing this. How do you see this desire from the activist side to make the institutions and the public spaces more truly inclusive, but at the same time, once we were entering, well, I say we, but I'm not part of any government, but once you were entering, you also discovered that there is a bureaucratic monster inside of the institution. So how to deal with that contradiction?
So after 2 years and a half being in an institution, in a government of an institution like the Madrid city, which is like, we have like 30,000 public workers, 5 billion euros budget a year. It's a huge monster, and I have one clear idea that this has been purposely built so that it's impossible to do what we want to do. It's not like accidentally things are difficult. No, it has been planned so that, for example, co-building and co-directing public spaces with civil society movements is impossible. It's illegal, directly illegal, and made illegal by laws that are outside of our scope, of our legislative scope, so it's impossible. That's why it's so important that civil society takes, through disobedience, spaces like La Ingobernable. But at the same time, when I say this, me as a member of the government, I feel weird, because civil disobedience has this nature that it has to be done from the civil society, and at the very moment that a government somehow supports it, even with a sentence, with a single speech, it somehow taking away its nature and dismantling its philosophical basis. That's why I feel also confronted feelings with what's going on in Catalonia. I feel that it is such a tremendous opportunity to democratize Europe, what's going on through disobedience of laws that are probably out of this century, but at the same time, I'm not sure about the position that governments should have in order not to, well, it's difficult to explain. Now, I wanted to take the opportunity to answer just one thing. The Plaza España voting was in February. It was participated by 214,000 people, which is, the press always compares it with the census, which in Madrid is 2.5 million people with right to vote, and that is crazy because we are voting the 1 square. And for us, having like 200 and something thousand people deciding together how a square is going to be, for us, it is crazy. Now what we did this week was we did that with 11 very small squares, not so small, but very in the external districts of the city. And all of the squares got between 5,000 and 10,000 people participating. But they did, from the initial diagnosis of what are the problems of this square, probable solutions, and then a final voting with ballot boxes in the streets, voting yes or no, we want to change this square, and what project do we prefer. Well, yesterday, all the newspapers, because we don't have any newspaper supporting anything that we do. So yesterday, every single newspaper you could find in a kiosk was saying failure in citizen participation. Failure, another missed opportunity for Carmena, which is the mayor of Madrid, and stuff like that. Only 1% of the census voted for these things. But if you go to the neighborhoods and you ask the people, it's crazy. For me, that since I live in my street, they have changed it every single square nearby my street, and I never had any opportunity to participate in the design, to think with my neighbors, to co-build something, to vote finally with everybody that wanted to vote. So there's this double reality going on. But the bad news is that the press is the one building the narratives at the moment. So we have this big problem.
Hi, my name is Nonti, and maybe I'm moving away a little bit from the subject, just speaking about now. And I'm involved in the eco-village movement. I'm originally South African, and I've been in Europe for about 9 years now. And I spent 6 years in Croatia, in Zagreb, well, in the south, but it's nice to hear that somebody's from Zagreb. And when I came to Spain, I had this real shock about the immigration situation, because I've never seen it on TV. I didn't know anything about it. And for me, besides building eco-villages and being a climate change activist, I realized that there's so much misconceptions and miseducation happening around the immigration issue. Nonetheless, lately we have the refugee situation. And Europe is really getting more and more unfriendly and really more tough towards the immigrants. So every year it's getting tougher and tougher. It's actually, the borders are closed for immigrants. For example, I'm not free to move around the Schengen. Even if I have a visa, I have to go through a lot of diplomacy, a lot of paperwork for me just to be in Spain and Croatia, Spain and Croatia. So I'm just wondering, what is it that is done on the local, on the local government to not only to change the laws, but to educate people, to educate normal people on the ground about immigrants and about the everyday struggles of immigrants. I see this a lot in terms of, for example, in Barcelona last year, there was a big march of saying refugees are welcome. And me and a group of young people who are involved in immigration situations in Barcelona, we came together and felt this was very naive. It was done from a good spirit and from a good heart, but it was very naive to just go on the streets and say the refugees are welcome when the laws actually don't welcome immigrants and refugees. Because when, I'll use the word we, when we get here, the situation is the laws are actually not welcoming, and the refugees are put in places almost like prisons where they have to stay there waiting for paperwork that might not happen. They have no freedom of movement, they cannot get jobs, they cannot even get a flat. So basically they're not integrated. So what is it that is being done to integrate refugees and to integrate immigrants? And the fact is, as a climate change activist, the fact is more immigrants are coming. So Europe, whether Europe likes it or not, more immigrants are coming, and more immigrants within Europe itself because of climate change, which is something that, well, I feel we cannot do much about it. It's already here. We've already messed up the planet. So I think we should be focusing on how do we make the laws more friendlier and more accepting. This is number one. And number two, how do we do basic education on how to receive immigrants and refugees? For example, in Zagreb, in all the 6 years that I've lived in Croatia, I've never seen African people. I was the only African person in my town, but in the past 2 years, I see a lot of African people. And what is being done to welcome people and to make the laws more easy and to get involved in the climate change issue?
So, thank you so much. I changed that chair because having into account what Kate said about the format, being like that, I think it was not proper to participate. Secondly, you can stay once you are there, so you don't need to leave the chair once you take the microphone. And also, I would like to propose to keep right now this topic. So, well, not only you, but please, because there is a group which is called, there are 7 groups within the European Commons Assembly, and one is called Solidarity as Commons, Refugees and Migrants. So I think there are people from this group in the room, so it will be nice if you come and we bring this issue to the conversation.
Good afternoon. Sorry. Yeah, please, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for bringing those topics, which are so urgent, and thank you for your testimony. It's fundamental to have actual testimonies and not just moral declarations. My name is Ana Margarida Esteves. I'm a sociologist, and better, I like to call myself a barefoot social scientist or a scholar activist. I'm based at the University Institute of Lisbon, Portugal, and I work with social and solidarity economy and commons movements. And I would like to call attention to a fact which is extremely scary, which is the way in which far-right movements, movements which want to go back to social homogeneity, which breed hate, which which otherize people who do not fit into the so-called mainstream or median characteristics of a given group. They are actively and cynically appropriating and co-opting the discourse, the framings, and also the strategies of progressive social movements. The social center movement, which was originally a creation of progressive emancipatory social movements. I'm sure most of the people here, if not all, know what that is. Well, in Italy, the far right is emulating the social centers and creating social centers as well, which look very much like anarchist squats or labor union ateneos. People dress in a similar way. The rooms look very similar. The whole atmosphere is very similar. But they read Ezra Pound, they remember Mussolini, they read Julius Evola. They're all about an idealized version of Italianness which has never existed. The far right is also taking over the internet. Fortune has been totally taken over. The far right is even appropriating the discourse of feminist and LGBTQ movements. It is painful for me as a feminist to know sisters who, on behalf of feminism, actively promote an extreme Islamophobic and anti-immigrant discourse in the name of protecting the feminine, and who claim that they wouldn't allow their sisters or daughters to travel to Paris right now because there are too many Muslims over there. And the same with the LGBTQ discourse. We all know examples. There are several examples around Europe of appropriation of the LGBTQ movement discourse to exclude the others, to frame an idea of Europeanness which in the name of protecting emancipatory ideals actually turn them into an instrument of authoritarianism and exclusion. And I'm very concerned that the same is happening with the idea of community and even with the commons. That the same thing is that the same ideas, the same frames and the same goals are being actively appropriated by the far right. And even the concept of democracy, as we very well know, not only in North America but also in Europe. Recent developments have shown that very well. So we should really go into a deeper reflection about the way in which concepts, frames and strategies can be actively and quickly subverted and co-opted into the opposite, with the aim of promoting the opposite effects of that which we struggle for in places like this. Thank you.
Even for me, it was a little bit disappointing because I had registered months ago and saying I would like to come here and be in the group that will deal with immigration issues, of course, because it's also personal. But just to find that there's only 4 people that were in this group out of the whole group that is here. And so 4 people had the urge and the necessity to say we would like to sit down, spend our time, and talk about the immigration and refugee issue. And for me, this really hurts. It disappoints me because I work with the North-South Healing and Reconciliation. It hurts to see how less important and how less touched or moved people are, even in this group that we're sitting here. And I know it's very harsh, but I feel like if I don't voice it out, who will? So I'm very straightforward about it. It's really disappointing to see that it is not such an urgency. It is not something that people see it as an urgency. That's something that needs to be dealt with. That's something that needs to be worked with and find solutions to. I could not be here in the morning because I had to visit 3 embassies to make sure that I fight for my papers, being 9 years in Europe. So just that, for me, it's really disappointing.
just to add some hope, there is an organization, a local organization called SOS Racismo Madrid, and they were organizing a workshop within the context of the festival on anti-Islamophobia strategies, and the group was full of young activists. So there were like 15 involved. I'm not saying this to deny anything of what you said, but just that there are many young activists with the desire of occupying these spaces. But I completely agree, and that's why I propose to keep on this topic, that sometimes when we talk about the commons, it seems that it's a separate thing than the refugee issue or the crisis with not accepting the other. So I'm fine as I'm moderating with keeping still the topic, and please, if anyone else wants to join the group, we can put more chairs, so there is no need to just keep the number of seats.
Yeah. Okay, should I speak? Or? Okay, so thank you for your intervention. Since you were in Zagreb, I feel like I should also say something. You were probably in Porin, perhaps, at some point. We have now councils in that neighborhood and work a lot with organizations that are working together, creating communities of migrants and whatever, local people. So what we do and try to do is support those kind of initiatives we always have through activism. But I can tell you that since 2 years back, a lot of new activists came and new initiatives and new kind of things started happening in Zagreb in terms of fighting for and together with migrants for rights, for our own rights, for a diverse city. But it's still in an activist purview. In terms of what cities are doing, they're not doing anything because they still have this, and they want to keep it that way, this divide, that the state is the only one who is responsible for migration and the cities have nothing to do with that. So that's something that, this divide has to be changed. In terms of specific policies and campaigns, I think that's a longer story, and perhaps we can talk other time.
I would say that like this municipal approach and putting things down on a local level also helps. Maybe it's not emphasizing the immigrants issue in that way, but actually it opens up the space on local level, on neighborhood level, to actually share something in common. And so I mean, and it's okay. So I come from Belgrade. I'm white. I have money to travel, and I also get pulled aside on the airport, and guys is checking all my stamps because he is afraid that I passed over my 3 months allowance in European Union. So for all the people that maybe think that it's not going to happen to them, it might going to happen to them if Spain falls apart and European Union follows. Then maybe we all will have to take our visas out for our next meeting. So it's something we all have to discuss, but then also open smaller communities. Also, we were not in Vienna, for example. They had elections now. Actually, there are neighborhoods in Vienna where like more than 60% of people are not allowed to vote. So you have actually elections on neighborhood level where majority of the neighbors cannot voice out their stance. So maybe also with resolving the issues of participation on this local level, you actually through these smaller steps, you are going to break down the whole deal that actually seems so frightening if you just start screaming about what's happening, but then if you look at it on a local level, it seems much more normal to actually be part of the community and then welcome your neighbors, whoever they are. I know. So I think we are all on the same job here.
Thanks.
So I was with Nanti in the working group about solidarity as a commons. We had very interesting discussion, I think, today. And one reason I think why also, I mean, I understand your disappointments, but we also discussed the fact that until now, solidarity was not really, discussed so much as a commons. And so people were not really organizing in this sense. It's a kind of a new conversation that we're opening, so yeah, we were only 5 people today, but I think it's just the beginning. But we had really interesting discussion about the fact that, for us, starting to talk about solidarity as a commons was really a way to say, in a context where there is a war against migrants, where, European, national, or local policies and the action of cops and everything is really brutal. Talking about solidarity as a commons is a way to say people have a possibility to produce solidarity. So each one of us can actually produce some solidarity. And we can think in terms of community organizing ourselves to do that, and also to try to protect ourselves, because we are also, people, there's a lot of criminalization going against people who are actually working with migrants and refugees in many European countries. So yeah, we talked about how, it's a way to bring, to show solidarity in public space at a time where, it's kind of pushed in the corner, and it's marginalized, and it's pushed away by governments. So it's a good performance in a way, on top of the fact that, of course, it's useful, on a daily basis, because very nasty stuff are happening, and we need to show some and act in some very rough situation. So there is this aspect, and also the aspect that as community producing solidarity, we're also then confronting traditional institutions, whether it's the states, the cops, the local municipality, and we enter into a relationship that may be very confrontational or not so confrontational. It could also be collaborative in some ways. But we are here to say, what's going on is not okay, and we are engaging to do other things, and so respond to us and do your job, because your job is to protect the people, not just those people, but just the people. So yeah, we talked about the fact that, I really believe working with people who work on immigration issues and work with refugees, that bringing to them the issue and the thinking of the commons is useful, because it's empowering, in this sense that, okay, we're producing all together solidarity, and we're organizing ourselves around that very key resource. But I think also that there is a role for the commoners, in that thing. So we talked today about, we worked during the workshop, and we will try to bring something back to the group. But yeah, it would also, of course, be nice to see more of the commoning and the commoners and carrying on this issue and integrating it into their work, because it's also about how our communities of commoners doing this or that in the city are open to all people, and also open to having migrants and refugees among themselves.
I think I have 2 questions regarding to this. The first question, and connected to, sorry, which was the name of the woman from Portugal? Anna. So I think Anna said something important and connected to what you were saying, who are the commoners? Who are the commoners? Because I think we can be reproducing some of the problems we want to fight against if we don't include as much as people as we can when it comes to people with any kind of background. So sometimes I think there could be a bubble, a white middle class bubble regarding to the commoners. And the other question regarding to what you said, Senia, it's true that we can face some of the problems regarding to diversity in the local context, because it implies proximity. But then we have the law, and the law can be used in a very violent way from a central government. So this is what we also face in Spain. So we have some friendly governments trying to change things, but there are certain things, certain common goods or public goods that are only touchable on a national level. Education, health, and I think we have an issue there.
Yes. Well, thank you for your words and for your testimony. I share somehow the view of how naive it is to make a demonstration saying we want to have all these people that is dying in the Mediterranean, we want to let them in. But at the same time, there's also a naive big banner in the City Hall of Madrid that says refugees welcome. It's a big banner in a beautiful, expensive palace and says refugees welcome, and refugees are not welcome, right? But the thing is that the refugees are not welcome because of the state and the laws. And the City of Madrid, well, I can't express how welcome you are, because whenever somebody migrates to my home, he's giving me the biggest present, the most important thing that they could give with us. It is the biggest demonstration of generosity to bring your life to my country, to my city. Now, how can we change this thing? Because I think this is a common feeling, not only in commoners, but in a lot of people. And well, in Spain, as you know, we have these migrant, I don't know the translation, but the CIES, which is like they are reclusion centers for migrants. They are not legally jails, but they are worse than jails in there. They don't have any human rights, and we have, for example, one in the neighborhood of Aluche. We councillors have visited there because sometimes inmates, I don't know the word in English, but take control of the installations because they can't live with it, and they just put their bodies in front of the polices, and they take control. Sometimes they took the rooftop and stood there for 2 days. And that kind of thing is something that can only be changed when the state recognizes that those kind of commons need to be democratized, you know, in the decision-making processes. Who is making the decision to let the people die? Who's making that decision? Now, the answer to that is probably something that happened just last Saturday in Spain. This was this Princess of Asturias Awards ceremony, which is like the Spanish Nobel Prize, was given to the European Union for its policies on refugees. Now, the counterpart, the payment that the European Union gave for that laundry of consciousness was that the biggest dogs in the European Union gave huge speech with the King of Spain, with the President of Spain, saying Catalonia is not going to leave. Europe is going to make sure that Spain doesn't break up this way. So if you look at the synergy, what we are facing here is a territorial thing. Is European Union and European authorities taking the territory of Europe and saying, okay, this is our territory, and we are going to say who's in, who's out. And that's the problem. That's what's need to be changed. And the only thing that we can, well, I'm sure there's 1,000 better ideas, but the only idea I can think of is to change decision-making processes. Because nobody agrees with people dying in the Mediterranean Sea. Nobody can agree with that. So who's taking that decision? Let's make that decisions democratically.
Yeah, I just realized actually while listening. Oh, sorry, my name is Miriam. I just realized while listening to you and like the various testimony, like this notion of solidarity as a common. And I just wanted to share a testimony of, it's not an initiative of mine, but in Paris, a group of 3 women who just created a school. Like, of course, education like is not something that people are allowed normally to create themselves, but they created a school for migrants because the language, learn the local language is the first factor of integration. And so I just realized while listening to you that those are the commoners that kind of fix the issues that the local municipalities don't fix. And again, like it's just one new field where like just 3 or 4 people together can manage to build like local language school and train hundreds of migrants and refugees every month. And even those like refugees become themselves teachers for others, so they recreate integration process and community-led initiative to solve those issues. So yeah, thank you for like sharing the stories. Now it's just clearer for me that I want to share that story with you. But
I feel like I speak too much, so maybe. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like, yes, as you were saying, for me, what's important, I'm a grassroots, I'm from South Africa. I grew up in apartheid. So I know, so basically, for me, is my ancestors were oppressed in their own country. We had to carry passports to move around in our own country. And for me, it's even a double surprise when I moved to Europe and I have to go through what my ancestors had to go through. And I feel like, okay, I'm going to advocate for this. I understand the fear of Europe feeling like they're being invaded. You know, when you feel your home and your background, suddenly there's people from other countries, and you're going through your own issues, you're going through your own problems, and you feel like the others are coming. You know, the idea of lack of resources, the idea of fear, hence so much hatred. And I understand that because it's something that the governments, in a way, want people to feel. You know, you cannot control people if you don't put fear in them. Hence, for me, is my drive is more education, empowerment, not only of the European people, but of the immigrants themselves, because I am very much for telling African young people to go back to Africa, because I feel I don't see what is there in Europe. So I very much propagate for education on both sides. And another thing also, education in a level of saying immigrants and refugees come with skills. We have skills and we have so much to give to Europe. If only we are given a chance to show this and say, we have skills and we are actually bringing gifts. We can actually help to grow Europe. And there's so much that the North can learn from the South. I mean, I look in the examples of eco-villages. Most European eco-villages are based on the indigenous knowledge that comes from the South, which is, I feel, eco-villages are the way of the future. And as I'm involved in eco-villages as well, is another project we're working on is to actually repopulate villages that have been abandoned in Europe, repopulate them with young European people, immigrants and refugees, give them skills, give them jobs, let them benefit the economy of Europe. And those who want to go back to their countries can go back with more skills. So it's a sense of, for me, more advocacy, more talking, more publishing, more education, rather than just going on the streets and marching, taking one day and being on the streets, but literally doing something on the ground, which is education. And this way, maybe it can then affect the laws and change the laws.
I forgot one sentence, and your intervention reminded me. So one other reason to bring this frame of the commons on this issue is that there is actually a lot of spontaneous self-organizing activities going on, an initiative across Europe. I mean, in France, for instance, there was a mapping done. There is more than 1,000 initiative locally, you know, just of people who are sick with the way they see other human beings being treated, or the action of the cops and all that. And people are they just start to act as commoners because, you know, because they cannot bear the situation. So that's also why it totally makes sense, I think, to make that bridge.
I think the story of the school is very interesting to make another question, which is, because I think we all agree that that could be an example of a small but very important common good, like a school for migrants in Paris. But the point is, how can we make that school sustainable on a long term? And that requires resources and also to, you know, make it possible for the people involved. And the other question is, how can we make that school model a replicable model? So to make it viral. And I think when it comes to the commons and the open source movement, that's really clear. That's the point. Like, you choose a very local example which is working and you want to spread it everywhere. And that's why you share the source, the open source. But then we go to the policy making level and again the laws. So the commons, if we want to make the commons as a huge thing, we should think on how to intervene in that level.
So, hi, my name is Lara. It took me some time to come here, so I'm gonna return to some ideas that you brought into the table. Mainly, maybe it's a problem of, I don't know, definition, lexicon, call it whatever. It's more the idea that you brought into who is a commoner and who is not, which was, I don't know. I think that's not productive, in my opinion, and it's my personal opinion, because I try to think about the commons as a social process, so process of commoning. And I'm not gonna say you are a commoner and you are not, because then you are reproducing discourses that precisely we are fighting against, like who is in, who is out, and all this discourse about the enclosure, I think we need to open rather than enclose. Yeah, and I mean, I understand that going into the street is not enough, like this powerful moment of being together in the street is not enough, but it is a beginning, I think, as a social process, which at the end, I thought it was really interesting what you also said about continuing occupying or hacking as a citizen, because I think that's the thing. I mean, law nowadays seems this kind of like entity there that no one, you know, can touch or whatever, but I think, yeah, that's a way to start, and it's like, it takes really long and it's really difficult to really do a change within the institution, but I think I mean, I understand and I'm with you, but I think it's really important. And also, I think, yeah, as she said also, like, there are many social processes working on commoning that are precisely working with a lot of refugees and immigrants, especially in Barcelona, and yeah, so that's.
Do you have the solution? Okay, because I was.
No, just because I'm tired and my English is not so sufficient. But I'm David. I come from popular neighborhood in France. Also, as you know, in France we have also the far right. But in the majority of the cities until now, they don't have the power. And they can take a place or social center or what I don't understand all the thing in Portugal, but they can't open space or in our city for the moment. But I think the migration issue is a challenge for the municipalist movement and also for the common movement. Because borders and migration policy are managed by the states, and in Europe by European Union or Frontex or some agency like that. And at the municipal level, we could open school, sure, to have a social housing policy, social economy, many things. Sure, I think we must to promote radical policy and to promote the power of inhabitants and to empower people, and also with the migrants. For me, migrants are part of our community. Sure, every day I buy my thing with migrants. So I live with migrants. But for migration policy, municipalism is not sufficient. So we need to attack the state and also European Union for that. And for example, in France, we have a political proposal to promote the vote of the migrants for the municipal election. But to do that, we need to change the constitution. So we need to have a big alliance to change the constitution at the national level. So I think for migration issue, we need to build alliance with other groups, not just municipalists movements, but also national and European movements.
Maybe coming back to the another, yeah. David, like to address the state, you first have to make connections, and the first normal connection is in your family, in your neighborhood, and then you build up to attack the state. But by putting the question like we against the state, it's the toughest question, like the really difficult one. Like how do you fight the state? But you can fight it through small multiplying cells that actually then pose the question like against the state, but because we are the state. So, but I was wanting to say something else, coming from Serbia, which has this promise of becoming a European part of the European Union, and by the time it comes to this point where like European Union is going to use us for cheap labor, I have to protest this thing about looking at immigrants through what kind of skills they can give us. So you don't, like, you come here, you don't have to pay your presence in our country. So solidarity is not about that. Like I can be a really lousy professional, but still I think I deserve to be welcomed somewhere. So I was thinking about proposing that at least in these communities or in municipalities where we have some voice, maybe change refugees welcome to fuck the borders, which seems more appropriate according to the present problems. Also, I mean, also define the borders, because we maybe think we are really, what's the word for it? Above all these issues, but actually by communizing places, we also make borders. So today we had this issue about one family in Belgrade losing the roof above their head, and then there was a question whether they should be allowed to stay in this independent cultural center that is slightly illegal at this point. So there is a group of people that are defending this illegal cultural center on the grounds of it being used for the culture, and that was the reason not to offer it for these people to sleep there. So, I mean, it's not like that by commoning things we somehow get all these kinds of things sorted out. We also make borders, so maybe we should think what are the bases on which we all unite and not go under those, yeah, levels.
Thanks.
don't like soups. I prefer sweets, and perhaps we can share. I was, yeah, my name is Frédéric, and I was concerned by the, not exactly your question when you ask us who are the commoners or what is a commoner, but, and yes, for sure, I prefer the approach of what is commoning, but I think that if we address this question in the context of the city, we have a problem with the policy or the the people that are doing politics and that are elected, because usually when these people arrived in the city council or in the region, etc., they are changing their role. And perhaps one issue we have to take care is how could we take care of them as citizens and also as activists, even, and not just to consider that when you are elected, you are changing your how we say that the hat and the role is when you change the role, you have to change not the vision or not the idea, but what you have to do. I agree that when you said it's a big budget, it's a big machine, it's a big monster, etc. It's true, and also probably when you enter, or perhaps you can share your experience on that, because I never was in this situation. When you enter in this situation, you are somewhere attracted by the logic of the state, because you have to defend or you have to be in some way to assure that there is a justice for all or something like that, and it's not easy to make this role. So perhaps the idea, if we think that how could we take care of these people when where they are, it should be an avenue or a perspective that we can open as commoners, thinking that politics is also a commoning or is also subject of the commons. And my experience as activist or citizen in Paris is that I'm facing a lot of difficulty with the city council or the city authority that is sometimes I think in its own logic and without taking in account the logic of the citizen. And perhaps one proposal should be for the commons movement, as commons movement, to develop a set of principles or a set of elements that can help us to measure or to say, okay, is it really coherent with this idea of commoning, or is it something that we can improve, or is it a behavior of the city council, or not the elected person themselves, but the city council and the action of the city? Is it coherent with this with the idea of the commons we have, and how could we improve that? Because this is the logic of, as you said, for example, the free software. We are trying to improve things. We are trying to make the things better, not just to judge and say it's bad and we are against that. We can be against sometimes, and we have to be, but we are also in the field, in the ground, to do things. And this this is the logic of the commons, I think, to try to do things and to also confront with the local authority and to say, okay, what is the part, and it was demonstrated by Gael, I think, what is the part we have to do and what is the part that, or the conditions that the city council or the city local authority have to ensure that could be helpful for us, because we want to participate. It's the new, or what is the new of the commons is that we want to participate not only by participating in a demonstration, in a debate, or in a participative process of voting, but we want to participate by acting, by reclaiming our rights, by acting them, to produce food, to produce health, to produce education, etc.
Before I pass the mic, it's Eva and then Pablo. Just to clarify, when I asked who are the commoners, I was not like defending the idea that we need a club and cards. It was more to follow on Nanti's comment on the lack of diversity when we think on the commons.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this what cities can do. Cities can do, of course, a lot. We had this situation a year and a half ago in Zagreb where we had 400 people that were stuck in a refugee camp once the borders closed. And there was intense talks between civil society organizations and the state and, I don't know, Red Cross. Where should we put them? Where should we put them? And there were some ideas about these old dilapidated factories far out in the country or something. And at the same time, the city of Zagreb had 1,500 empty apartments in its own that they own. But it has 1,500 empty apartments in a city that has no housing policy, that has no social or economic social policy of housing, or does it house its poor or its young or its old? So on top of that, the thing that, you know, the point being that it has a lot of property that it's not using in social, to improve social life of the city. And if being in the position to change that, one can, of course, improve lives of many by integrating, not just integrating migrants, it's just improving conditions of life in cross-cut around the city, or say what different social strata. So yeah, I think cities can do a lot with its property to integrate and to improve on socioeconomic status of both people already living in them and those coming. So yeah, I don't know, maybe you can add to that. What about this?
Well, the quick answer is yes. In Madrid, there's so many things. I would spend too much of your time explaining all the things, all the small things, but big changing things that we are doing in terms of collective spaces, human rights, migrants, women, and so on. But to me, the most interesting thing is how the commons and direct democracy correlate. And to my experience, the key to commons is direct democracy. When we did, for example, the participatory budget in Madrid, the most voted projects that gathered millions of euros of the budget of the city was, you could see a common in each of them, like houses for women victims of gender violence, spaces for Alzheimer patients, spaces for crianza, how do we say that, or ludoteca? Childcare. Yeah, but not like a school, but like just to go there and nurse your baby somewhere, do it in a shopping mall. And also the mothers and the fathers can make the decisions on the space and really take it. Now, I'm gonna do a quick question. Is somebody from Iceland here? Anybody from Iceland? No. Anybody from Hungary? No. Okay, then I'm gonna explain these two examples really quickly. It's a shame that nobody from there. But in Iceland, the government set a number of refugees that they're gonna receive, pretty much like in any other country. Well, Iceland is a weird example because it's a tiny place, but people really didn't like that, and they disagreed a lot with the government. They say we can really take so much more people. We are ready. We want them here. So they mobilized. They used a direct democracy mechanism, gathering signatures and so on, and they forced, like in 1 month and a half, the government to change the policy. And that was a huge example of contradicting the fears of direct democracy that say that the majority is going to push into the minorities, they're going to subvert the commons, they're going to destroy human rights because people is not able to make generous or commoner decisions. But also something happened in Hungary where the president decided to make a horrible law on refugees, and he was not able to pass it maybe, or he was in doubt. So he called for a referendum, and the referendum had a minimum quorum, so that if, I don't know if it was a 30 or a 50% of the people didn't vote in the referendum, it was not binding. And the people realized that that was like a horrible referendum, so we are gonna stay at home, so even if the people that vote yes, we can sort of boycott this thing, and it worked. And we find some examples of the opposite thing going on in Switzerland, but it's just a couple of examples that everybody knows about the mosques. But I think that there's so much many examples of how direct democracy is the key for taking power back and making the commons accessible and creating communities that support the commons. I think that for me, that's something that we should really talk about, because if we talk a lot and think a lot about the commons and are we commoners and how are the commons and how do we like it, but if we talk about the key to get into that, we are probably going to find ways. And in Madrid, I think we are finding some ways. I hope.
We have 10 more minutes just to share it.
Hi. Hola. Me llamo Iván. I spend a lot of time studying movements and advising on campaigns. Just two quick things I learned from hanging out with neo-fascists and anti-LGBT hate groups. I know it's a long day and people are tired and leaving, but at these rallies, nobody leaves. When they gather, people just increase in size over the night. People start texting their friends and family and people that need to join in, so they actually increase in size as a meeting progresses over time. There's a few lessons to be learned, I think, and one is, I think one of the things that is a cornerstone of a lot of leftist or what is identified as more progressive politics is kind of the openness to diversity and multiplicity of views that often cannibalize the movements themselves, fragment them, result in division or a lot of time wasted and then frustration and burnout and things like that. Whereas with the right, a lot of the right movements and all the conservative movements, there is a huge buy-in and there's a huge homogeneity that actually helps out in getting things done. in having every meeting, every gathering be very, very action-oriented. There's very little kind of academic discourse of whether or not what we're doing is right or wrong. It's incredibly goal-oriented, which is incredibly successful. One more thing, all of us here are existing and thriving or less thriving in a neoliberal system while countering it and fighting it. But we are a part of it, and there's a lot of dissonance to do with that. So the other side is like in it, and like, yeah, we're in it to win it because we're just going to kind of get more of this going. So just being a little bit aware of what we can learn from the opposition, like the other fellow human beings that we're up against, is I think kind of beneficial when we're building our movements, and something so the language that we use and how we communicate, the commoning has a huge advantage in almost becoming a religious movement. I say that in quotation marks, but the fact that we need new language, like, are we activists? Are we politicians? Are we something new? Are we a new breed of human being that are we going to, how adequately are we going to reframe ourselves and then galvanize appropriately around that? Because, we said, like, we kind of all agree on the same thing, but I find that we don't a lot of the time, and that's what really sets us behind. And I think time is of the essence. So that's it for me.
You were the last ones. That's it. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the translation team. They have been working intensively, and also I would like to apologize because since the set was there on the stage and we changed it, that created also some things, so sorry about that. And as we were saying, let's find the key to open as many doors and windows as we can to have a diverse, heterogeneous, and huge systemic change. Thank you so much for coming, and see you at the party.